All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the October 2025 meeting for the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. Our first agenda item is to review the public hearing document for the Essential Fish Habitat Amendment, and we have Jessica and Tori here with us, so take it away. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Okay, let me just get set here. There we go. So for today, the council is going to review and consider approving the Omnibus Essential Fish Habitat Amendment public hearing draft. This omnibus amendment would simultaneously amend all of the fishery management plans for the council and make changes to essential fish habitat designations and descriptions for 14 of the council's 15 managed species. The council may also consider selecting a preferred alternative for public hearing purposes at this time. There's only 2 alternatives within the document to choose from, but you do not have to go out to public hearings with a preferred alternative selected. That's at your discretion. So just to recap, for essential fish habitat, councils are required to develop EFH designations for all of your managed species to support the essential fish habitat consultation process. Habitat areas of particular concern, HAPCs, are a discretionary subset of essential fish habitat that can be updated through this document. So there are HAPC descriptions that are included within this document for consideration. And the councils are required to review new information and consider whether revisions are needed to essential fish habitat every 5 years. Once the councils have identified essential fish habitat, federal agencies must consult with NOAA Fisheries regarding whether their actions may adversely affect EFH. The councils consult sometimes formally or informally comment on some of these actions in many cases. And our state partners play a large role in the process of commenting on these kinds of projects. And I'll highlight some of those later today when I present on behalf of the Habitat Ecosystem Services Division on their habitat update at 4 o'clock. So NOAA Fisheries nationally consults on thousands of projects every single year. And within the Northeast, they consult on about 250 to 300 projects per year. About 80% of those occur in nearshore state waters, making designation of EFH in those areas particularly important for habitat conservation. So the council recently completed its 5-year essential fish habitat review in April 2025. Foundational work to support that review started back in 2017, which is when Tori and I, 2016-17 is around when we started working together on this. And we've been working very closely with New England Fishery Management Council staff. I'll note Michelle Bachman, Jenny Couture, and Julian Garrison have played a very important role in helping us collectively get all of this work done, as well as Chris Hake from Monmouth University. So the council's review took about 2 years, and we completed that. All the information and reports from that review are available on the website. So since the council had previously initiated an omnibus all species FMP action back when we initiated the review, the council didn't need to initiate work on this amendment. So as soon as that review was done, the FMAT began working on, the Fishery Management Action Team began working on a public hearing draft for the council. So in terms of steps that we've worked through, the review is complete. The FMAT, Fishery Management Action Team, began work for the council on this amendment. We've had an FMAT meeting and a Ecosystem and Ocean Planning Committee and advisory panel meeting that happened in early September, which brings us today to the October 2025 council meeting to consider approving this public hearing draft. If you approve the draft to be taken out for public comment and hearings, then we would conduct hearings late 2025 into early 2026, and the council is tentatively scheduled to take final action in April 2026. You'd have to identify your preferred alternative and submit that action to National Marine Fisheries Service for approval. This action does not have rulemaking that would need to be associated with it. And this is the public hearing draft is organized in a structure that's similar to many of our other amendment documents, but it is categorically exempted from the National Environmental Policy Act. So while we're not doing formal NEPA through this document, we are doing Magnuson-Stevens Act. It's Magnuson-Stevens Act document with a familiar amendment structure. And because we don't have implementing regulations associated with it, some of the other applicable laws that we normally would include in a document like this, like an RIR, an IRF, regulatory impact review, those kinds of things wouldn't be included in the document. So the document's organized with an introduction and background, two alternatives, a no action and action alternative. All of the proposed changes that would occur under Alternative 2 by FMP and species are all bundled within one section. So you have the ability by selecting the action alternative to move all of those changes as one bundle through the process. We've included some other supplemental information in the document. A fishing effects determination is drafted there for you to consider. We describe the impacts of the alternatives, and after the public hearings are completed, we'll address any other applicable laws for inclusion. There's just a few appendices we've included in the public hearing document. We're trying to keep this relatively short and readable for the public. One of those appendices is fact sheets on all of the current designations as they appear today, and another one that is being completed. So there is some information in the document right now, but prior to going out to public hearings, we'll have a completed methods appendix that we're cooperatively developing with the New England Fishery Management Council. So within the document, for the essential fish habitat text designations, we put those side by side so you can see the current no action and the proposed action alternatives and what those look like for each of the individual life stages. I'll just note, and you can see on the screen, that there's a bit more habitat information in the newly revised designations. We work closely with the Fishery Management Action Team and Plan Development Team members, particularly those that do the essential fish habitat consultations, and they felt like having more information in there would be useful, more detailed information about habitat. We've also included maps side by side for easy comparison, so you can see the no action and the action for each of these individual life stages, essentially in one figure. And we have included all of this information in an essential fish habitat demo application that Tori is going to share with you in a few slides. That shows all the foundational information and how these designations were put together. So to really help people navigate how we use the data to really drive what these maps look like. So as I noted, the two action alternatives, the no action, we don't expect any direct impacts from that action. So none on managed species, physical habitat, protected species, or human communities. Under that alternative, current designations would remain in place, and there would be no other impacts other than not using the most up-to-date technical and scientific information to describe essential fish habitat. And then the action alternative is those updates would be made to those 14 managed species. Monkfish would be excluded, as New England has taken the lead on addressing those monkfish designations. There's a memo within your briefing materials that highlights what they've done there, using similar techniques and approaches and methods that are described in this document. So under the action alternative, again, it would be administrative in nature, but it would allow for better information about where essential fish habitat is found for the council managed species. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the text and the map designations and what we've accomplished with this work. Some of our key takeaways in terms of the improvements that were made, these are really advances over previous designation methods. We've been working for a number of years on data modeling. The Northeast region would now be the second region in the country to apply model-based methods to map essential fish habitat. So we also have new mapping technologies and expertise in the form of Tori Kentner, who's working on our team. So in addition to developing the demo application, but coming up with new methods to put all of this information together in an efficient way. We've included all of the life stages for our species. Many of our previous designations had left some life stages out. So for example, Surf Clam and Ocean Quahog had juveniles and adults, but did not have designations for egg and larvae. So we've made sure that we've left no life stages out, even if the information is very limited. And our hope is that these approaches will streamline future updates to these designations. So we won't have to start, 10 years prior, that, we really can get these updates done for you every 5 years as needed by mechanizing a lot of our methods. For the text descriptions, working with New England, we've also worked to use consistency in language and structure of the essential fish habitat text and descriptions so that we're talking in terms of similar terms, similar ways of describing habitat types, parts of the water column. So it's clear, consistent terminology across all of our individual FMPs, but also in terms of what New England is using in their text description. So it's a little bit easier to compare those. And all this work's really promoted collaboration with the regional partners like New England and our federal partners, as well as our data providers that have provided lots of data for this work. So I know I've shared this before, but I'm just going to run through this briefly. For our EFH designations, our methods, we have a specific flow to how we've developed the maps and the text. So for those species for which we had sufficient data within our inshore and offshore trawl survey information, we have a model-based framework that was used to develop species distribution models. For most of these species, these were joint species distribution models. They were run through a model called the community level basis function model. And those model-based outputs were used to identify occupied habitat within the modeled footprint. And then we clipped those using the top 75% predicted density quantiles for those species. So for the ones we had plenty of data to do this modeling work, that model-based framework was used to create the offshore portion of that map and some of the inshore areas. Where we also had sufficient inshore data, that data was integrated through a non-modeled framework. Well, it's model-ish. We'll call it model light. So we use that inshore fishery dependent data, plus depth, temperature, and salinity information. We were able to clip those inshore occurrences that we had in that inshore data to exclude the lowest 5% of occurrences. So trying to use similar clips as to what we did in the model-based piece. We overlaid that with suitable estuarine and coastal zones that had suitable conditions inshore for those species, added a 3-kilometer buffer, and then merged all of that together into a single map. So that's how for our model-based species, we developed those essential fish habitat maps. And then text descriptions were developed and integrated and verified using expert knowledge, literature, and some other data sets we use to inform those text descriptions. We have a few data poor species that didn't directly follow this framework exactly, but most of the species followed this general framework because we had sufficient data for all of those life stages. So the species distribution models, those estimate the habitat niche for our species. So we take that trawl survey information, it's run through a series of environmental filters and environmental predictors, and we come up with predicted densities of the species. So it's not just present absence, it's also conditioned on biomass. These were done for most of those species. The models that were joint predominantly used the trawl information, but we were able to also run separate models for surf clam and ocean quahog using the clam survey information, and golden tilefish using the golden tilefish longline survey information to develop these maps. The modeling predominantly relied on the center trawl survey, NEMAP, Maine and New Hampshire, and Massachusetts trawl species for all of those trawl-based survey species. One of the other things that we've done is adopted similar model-based terminology that is similar to what the North Pacific Council has been using. One of the things we realized partway through this process, as we're moving towards model-based approaches in different regions, and other regions are looking to pick up these approaches, we were being kind of loose with our terminology. We were calling things, footprints, distributions, primary habitat, EFH, and we came to the conclusion based on FMAT discussions, PDT discussions, and some discussions with the North Pacific staff that settling on some clear terminology so we're all talking in the same currency would be useful. So the top 95% of these distributions is the general distribution area. So that's broadly where these species are found, minus that 5% clip we did. The top 75% is what we're calling principal habitat area, essential fish habitat. So this is a little bit more refined area, which as we move up data levels for EFH from level 1 to level 2, you want to be using more refined areas to identify where you might find these species and to prioritize consultations. And then the top 50% is considered core habitat, and top 25% is hotspots. So I'm going to hand this off to Tori for the next few slides.
Morning, everybody. So my task was to kind of look at the inshore areas. So we had an abundance of data there. You can see on the left, there are a ton of different surveys that go deep into the inshore estuary areas, but that's difficult to combine with the models. So I wanted to kind of use that as in the best way possible. So what I did is a frequency of occurrence by species and age class. And you can see on the right there is what that looks like for butterfish. So it gives us a chance to kind of use that inshore data and apply it to our EFH. Next slide. I also wanted to kind of create estuary and coastal zones. So the idea here is that we have these inshore occurrences, but they aren't serving everywhere in an estuary. So by creating these coastal zones, we can kind of include or exclude these based off of their salinity and depth. So we have 4 salinity classes: marine, polyhaline, mixing, and tidal fresh. And then depth is shallow, mid is 2 meters to the 75th percentile, and then channel deep is greater than 75th percentile. And that's by each estuary. So it creates the figure that you see on the right. And the data that went into that is on the left. So we use the Northwest Atlantic Regional Climatology salinity, and then also high resolution bathymetries to create the depths. There was a number of different data sets that go into this, but those are the biggest ones. And those, we really were just looking for the highest resolution data that we could find. So creating those estuary coastal zones allowed us then to subset those based on species distribution. So here's an example with scup. So we use the occurrence, so that's what's in orange and red there. And then we also use text-based selection. So when the literature suggested that the habitat is like polyhaline, mixing, or marine, we also included those areas. We added a 3-kilometer buffer for margin of error, and then you get what you see on the left. So that is the EFH polygons for scup in the inshore regions. So that ties together both the data and also ecological knowledge of that species. Another thing that I worked on, because I had this plethora of data, is creating this 1-kilometer grid with all the climatology and bathymetry. And so then what you can do is do kind of threshold limits. So we can create like a species envelope. And so this is really useful for some of our data poor species. So if we don't have actual survey data to use, we can look where that species is known to occur, temperature, salinity, depth thresholds. We can apply that to the grid, and then you can get a subset of where we're expecting to see that species based on their limits. So that's an example for butterfish there. Next slide. So what happens to create our EFH maps is we have the model-based area, so that's the top 25% density. Then we have the inshore zones or with occurrence or appropriate habitat, so that's the next one. And then you combine those together to form the principal EFH area. Should I go to the app? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't do that.
Okay. Stephen, can you give me control to share my screen? Okay, so I created this draft EFH designation app. And so what it does is it gives users a chance to look at all of the species. And you can, so on the first tab, you can select which council. So we'll do the Mid-Atlantic Council, and then you can select by species. And so you can see all of the layers are in here, Atlantic mackerel adult, Atlantic mackerel juvenile. If we've done eggs and larvae maps, those are also in here. And so it gives everyone a chance to kind of look at it, zoom in, kind of see what these look like. I'll give you a quick tour here. So there is a take a tour button, which will run you through it. There's a layer info button. So this talks about the methods that we use to create these. There is the proposed EFH. So that's what you see on the screen here. Let me switch over to SCUP just as an example. So all of the surveys that go into the inshore are listed on the sidebar. There's a link to go to the NERA Data Explorer if you want to take a deeper dive into any of these surveys. Okay, so SCUP here on the screen, you are looking at the proposed EFH. And so as I said, this comes together because we have our inshore, which shows up in orange, and then our model quantiles, which shows up in a yellow, green, blue color. So those get combined together to create our proposed EFH. And then you can also look at the current EFH. So that's what the current designation is. So it's easy to kind of flip in between those two and see how things are being proposed to change. You can also look at the species estuary zones that are getting designated, some of the other model layers. So there's a model density, there's a model encounter probability. And then you can also look at the estuary zone layers that I created. So all that's in there for you to look at on your own time, but I'll just run through. So SCUP juvenile is another example. So you can compare how those are looking compared to SCUP adults, and then also SCUP eggs and larvae, where we're expecting to designate those areas.
Okay. So we initially developed this tool for our action teams and our plan development teams, but as we worked through our process, we decided that it's a really great tool to have as part of our public hearing process. So prior to public hearings, we have nearly all of the maps in there at this point. We're just doing some final polishing and touch-ups, but the plan is to include that as part of the tool in the process to help our stakeholders sort of navigate what we had, what we have now, and what all that information looks like. I'll also note on the inshore information, previously, most of our designations just turned on the whole estuary because we didn't have any refinement there in terms of excluding for species that don't occur in freshwater or don't occur in polyhaline that are just at the mouths of the estuaries. So all of this, so all of these new approaches, I think, are really big improvements, both in the offshore modeling, but also into how we're handling that inshore information, making it a little bit more refined. All right, so why is this not? There we go. So there is case law that required components must be established in the FMP. So the EFH maps and text have to be described and shown in the amendment itself. And so within the amendment, we're only going to be showing those current no action designations and then the current proposed the proposed EFH designation, so that blue-gray footprint map on the left-hand side. We do have all of these other ancillary products and tools, like you saw that quantile information and other detail on where the species may be found in more abundance. in those core hotspot areas that we talked about. So we're planning to load all of those up after the fact and have those available for the consultations, for any partners that want to use that information. But that doesn't have to appear in the amendment itself. So we haven't included that there right now. So once all those layers are all developed, and after the council has taken action, those all feed into the essential fish habitat mapper that NOAA uses. And I'm just showing that on the right-hand side. So a developer comes in, drops a pin on a map, and it'll pull up all the layers for all those species that occur in a spot. So like I clicked on one spot and there are 47 species with EFH in that one spot that I clicked on. So it all just sort of comes up. And then they sort of wade through the text and go through the next steps with the consultation staff. As I noted earlier, we have information for all of our 14 species. You have that memo for monkfish that was provided on what New England has done for that. But we've been able to develop maps and text for all of those life stages that we have. Spiny dogfish was the only one that didn't need egg or larvae because it's a live bearer. So all of those are in the report as well in the document. So our text descriptions, we built off our original approaches, but we definitely added a lot more habitat detail. We referenced and talked about the spatial distribution of the species, but we definitely dug a bit deeper into habitat characteristics and associations, substrates, environmental ranges, depth, salinity, temperature, as well as variations in habitat use. The consultation people indicated to us that information on seasonal, geographic, oceanographic needs or things that change how the species are using that habitat are useful. If a species is on the shelf for 6 months of the year and then off the shelf for the other 6 months, if their project's on the shelf, it's not an issue. The species isn't there. So including that directly in the designation so they're able to figure out whether their project and where that species is located is going to be an issue is important. Because we now had all of this additional inshore data that we previously didn't have for our previous designations, we were able to update within all of the action alternatives, depth, temperature, and salinity ranges. So most of them were previously just based on center trawl survey information. We now expanded our database to show all of that, to include all of that state data as well and create new ranges for that information that we were able to include within our species designations. We also look to other new relevant research and information. This is an example from our NOAA partners, Renee Mercado-Allen and Ryan Morse, looked at scup and black sea bass, juvenile and adult use of oyster aquaculture cages for all kinds of life history activities, shelter, feeding, courtship, spawning. So we were able to add, as an example, those cages to the list of other man-made structures that were utilized by those species. So we combed through the literature and tried to integrate those important pieces about habitat use. For habitat areas of particular concern, the council has 2 existing HAPCs, 4 canyon areas that contain clay outcropping and play-below habitats for tilefish and for summer flounder SAV. So we included draft options for habitat areas of particular concern within this public hearing amendment. I'll note that HAPCs are a subset of EFH. They can be place-based, they could be species-based, they can be based on habitat type, but they have to be areas that are either ecologically important, sensitive to human-induced environmental degradation, or stressed by environmental activities, or rare. So we've included a number of different approaches. Many councils, other councils, do specific outreach to solicit input on habitat areas of particular concern. And so going out for public hearings, this is an opportunity for you to solicit comment on some of these different approaches. One that we've done in the document for bluefish, summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and surf clam is based on the NOAA fisheries fish and fish habitat climate vulnerability assessments. So for species that are highly dependent on specific habitat types, and those habitat types are highly or very highly vulnerable to climate change. We highlighted those as habitat areas of particular concern for those species. And in this example, scup egg larvae and spawning adults utilize submerged aquatic vegetation. Right now, we only have that noted for summer flounder. So in this case, that could be under consideration to include that for scup, egg, larvae, and spawning adults as well. But you can look through each of those. I won't go through all of them. We also included some model-based output HAPCs. So for some of the pelagics, like longfin squid, species that tend to aggregate, we could look at those model-based outputs, those hotspots that appear as yellow in those quantiles, and consider those as potential habitat areas of particular concern. And we've also heard over the years that we're not considering dynamic oceanography or other kind of features that are part of habitat, water column habitat, as important parts of species HAPCs. So in this example, we've included cold pool. There's recent literature looking at cold pool as an important feature of ocean quahog habitat in terms of the types of temperatures and conditions that ocean quahog need to thrive. So we've included cold pool and ocean acidification in the case of ocean quahog HAPCs. So all different sort of flavors and examples, they're in there and could be taken out to public hearings, and you could gather input on what types of HAPCs you might want to include in your final action. There is a fishing effects determination section in the document. The determinations of the impacts of fishing are actually included in every council action. In this case, we need to evaluate the impacts of fishing on EFH and on the proposed EFH in this document. There's information that's been included in that section. So the current fishing gear prohibitions that you have in place to prevent, mitigate, or minimize effects are described. We talk about recent changes in the Mid-Atlantic fleet in terms of size, revenues, things like that. You have model-based outputs of fishing effects that we've previously presented here to the council. And then you have the revised description of EFH that are going to appear in this document. So we ran estimated fishing effects modeling on individual EFH areas for a number of select species, included those in the document. The mean fishing effects that's across our entire region, across all gear types, has been around 10%. So you'll see some of these effects in these EFH areas are slightly lower by a few percent or slightly higher by a few percent, but the numbers aren't particularly, I guess, surprising relative to what we might expect. And those differences might reflect that for certain species EFH, the fishing that's occurring within those footprints may be happening in areas that are less vulnerable to fishing. So bluefish has a relatively low fishing effects percent. I think it was 4% in our area, but they may be occurring in sandier areas or areas where there's less effort occurring. And some of the higher levels might be the counterpoint to that, where it might be in more vulnerable habitats where there may be more effort occurring there. It is across all of the gear types. So if the council wanted to explore it further, we could break those out into a finer scale. But as drafted right now, the overall determinations in there are that additional measures to address those adverse effects EFH aren't needed at this time based on the information that's been provided collectively in the document. So that is everything that is in that really big document. Public hearing draft, as well as the application. So the Ecosystem and Ocean Planning Committee and advisors met on September 12 and reviewed the draft document to date. You have a summary of that in your meeting materials. I'm not going to go through all of the details of that, but there were no motions made, but by consensus, the committee and the advisors agreed with the approach taken in developing the public hearing draft, and they had no objections to moving this document forward to the council for consideration today. So based on that, and if the public hearing draft is approved by you today, we'd expect some of our staff next steps would be to finalize the last of these outputs and maps, just polishing them up to get the last pieces into the document and into the application, so it is a full and complete package. We need to finish finalizing that methods Appendix B with the New England Fishery Management Council. So we're expecting to do that in the next couple of weeks. And then we would go through the process of scheduling public hearings and a comment period. Based on the input from the committee and the advisors, we'd be looking at a 60-day comment period, December 1 to January 31, 1 in-person and 4 virtual meetings. We'd plan for some structured outreach. I think we want to do another pass of this information with our essential fish habitat consultation folks. I think we'd like to do another pass with the center and stock assessment people. They've weighed in on many of these earlier iterations, but now that we have a final complete package, we'd like to share that with them. Some of the other CZM folks we work with, as well as just getting the package ready for all of our industry advisory panel members that we would do outreach to and all of our other stakeholders. And then we would plan to do a recording of the public hearing talk. That was something that the committee and advisors recommended. And we could have Chris Hake explain his modeling work, and Tori explain the demo app and sort of demo how to use that for everyone, and just try to make that process easier for folks that want to weigh in on the information that we provided. And I think that's it for our presentation, and I'll take any questions. Or we'll take questions.
Thank you both. It's clearly been quite a journey. I had the good fortune to catch this at the SSC too. I think it takes at least a couple times to digest all that that's coming out to the public here. So let's start with questions. Go ahead, Jim Gilmore.
Thanks, Chairman, and Jess and Tori, great job again. That the video stuff is, well, my kids accuse me of spending too much time on video games now, but that's okay. I don't know if it's easy to put up any of the maps, but one thing I did notice, and I'm just a little, questioning why this happened particular for a couple of species like black sea bass. Most of the other maps have the previous map and then the current map, and it seems to find a general pattern. But black sea bass is like got a sharp truncation on it now, and there was another species too. So it stops at Norfolk now, and it used to go down further than that. So could you explain a little bit why that change happened? Thanks.
I can. So we have a split right there at the North Carolina-Virginia border for blue line tilefish, because South Atlantic Council is designating blue line within its designation, and then Mid-Atlantic Council is designating within our council boundary, which again clips at that North Carolina, Virginia. In the case of sea bass, we previously had designated some of that sea bass EFH down below that boundary, but the South Atlantic Council is also designating within their region from the bottom up. So there's a small region in between where we now, we currently have different designations from 2 different councils in that space. So in talking with, and I didn't work on the previous one way back when, but in talking with the South Atlantic Council staff, and I talked a little to Chris about this, and we collectively decided that it made a lot more sense to just clip that right at the council boundary, and avoid that confusion for the consultation folks. So there is coverage for black sea bass essential fish habitat through the snapper grouper plan for all of those areas south. It just made sense to do that abrupt clip for those 2. For all the other species that we have, the South Atlantic Council is not also designating for those other species. So you'll notice we have some like bluefish that runs all the way down to Florida because we're the only ones doing the designation for that species.
Very good. Thanks. Yep. Go ahead, Mike Penny.
Sorry, can you just explain where is black sea bass clipped?
The North Carolina, Virginia.
Okay.
The council.
Doesn't the management unit though go to Cape Hatteras?
It does. The management unit goes to Cape Hatteras, but south of that North Carolina, Virginia boundary, black sea bass EFH is designated through the snapper grouper plan for South Atlantic. So they cover all the way up to North Carolina, Virginia.
Okay.
The problem would have been that little space in between. We would have had 2 different text designations from 2 different councils and slightly different maps. So we have full coverage for the entire coast for black sea bass, EFH.
Yeah, but I guess I'm wondering why the South Atlantic Council is designating EFH not in their management unit. If it's the Mid Atlantic Council's management unit.
I'm gonna like to, see, Chris bravely raised his hand. So Chris Batts,
Yeah, don't know, probably a question, not any clarification to this, despite living in North Carolina. Jessica, the EFH designation for the South Atlantic snapper grouper it's the entire complex or are there species-specific EFH designation for the different fish in the snapper grouper complex, which, there's dozens of?
Yeah, it is for their full complex up to that boundary, but black sea bass is included within that designation, and it's a pretty broad coverage up to that NC Virginia line.
Okay, so it covers up to the state line. That makes sense. Is there EFH designation similar to ours where it's species specific? So they have different EFH designation for gag grouper versus red grouper versus the other species in the complex, or is it just more or less the same? I just don't know. I've never looked at their EFH, and maybe Carrie might have some insight of that.
go ahead, Gary.
I worked on it as staff, but it was in 1998 that we first did it. So forgive me. I am almost positive that we have it separated out by all 55 species. So exactly, we have gag or, they're estuarine dependent. So we have that clarified versus we didn't say all snapper grouper species. All estuaries are important to all snapper grouper species because they're estuarine dependent. So I'm pretty sure we have it broken out. Thank you.
So you have the text broken out, and then you have a single map layer that sort of collectively addresses them all. So that's the difference.
Other questions? Okay. We still have an outstanding one from the regional administrator. I guess we'll look to the public. Are there questions from the public on the presentation and the public hearing document so far? Go ahead, Lori.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jessica, on the fishing effects determination, it said that the mean was 10%. And when you look at why this action is being taken, it's to update EFH and the effects. Is there been a trigger declared of what that estimated fishing effect can be before fishing effects would be addressed? Okay, thanks.
No, there is not a trigger. And if the council going forward, now that we have this model up and running throughout the whole Northeast region, that could be something, if you wanted to think about in the future, but right now there's nothing there.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. So, Jessica, I don't know if you want to just kind of go through. We could either move this forward. We haven't heard any particular discussion that sounds to me like we're leaning towards a preferred alternative here. So I don't know if you just want to walk through, the possibilities of accepting as is, going with preferred alternatives. Also, do you want a motion for this, or can we move this forward with just consent?
Yeah, I do have a draft motion prepared, and the draft motion does suggest a preferred alternative in that. If you want to consider that, if someone wants to make the motion and consider that collectively, there's only two alternatives, so it's a pretty straightforward motion.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a good start for us. So I saw a hand, Joe Grist. Joe Grist is ready to make this motion. Jim Gilmore's ready to second. So with that, I'll read this in here. So the draft motion would be move to approve the Omnibus Essential Fish Habitat Amendment Public Hearing Document for public comment and hearings with alternative 2 noted as the preferred council alternative. So I think that moves us along nicely. We have a maker and a second. Is there any discussion on this motion? I hope we can have a little. Okay. Michelle, I'm going to go to you, and then I'll allow the maker and seconder to comment too. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I fully support this motion. And I just want to commend Jessica and Tori and Michelle Bachman and Julian and the collaboration between the Mid-Atlantic and New England Council staffs. I know there was a little bit of consternation when we sort of kicked off this process a couple of years ago, especially consideration of an omnibus amendment for, updating all of our EFH designations. But I really just want to give a huge shout out to all those folks who really, for all of the collaborative work to build all of the tools and all the products that support these updated designations, and for the, I think, very efficient manner in which this happened. This is a huge undertaking. And, I'm really pleased that we've been able to, get to this point, it really in such an efficient manner. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. And so I would like to look to the maker and seconder. So Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing Michelle to go ahead of me, because as the committee chair, she has definitely put quite a bit of effort into this, and I'm appreciative of getting to work with her. It's just really clear. I mean, MSA requires this, requires FMPs to describe and identify EFH. So it's very clearly stated in executive summary for that. The action would update the designations and descriptions of EFH based on the best available information of the 14 species of the council. The action is also updating the council's fishing effects determinations, especially where their action is needed to minimize the adverse effects in fishing on EFH based on new information. A lot of work has gone into this. I'm extremely appreciative of the staff and everything they've done here, having sat in the meetings with them and everything they've done through the Shiny apps, which is a new thing for me when I first heard about it, but y'all have just impressed the heck out of me. So this is an administrative action at the end of the day too. So, we're not talking ACL, ACT, OFL, ABC, all the normal acronym soup that we deal with around this table. It's a little something different. It's kind of nice. So definitely like to see this move forward.
Thank you, Joe. Jim?
Just echoing Michelle's comments, and essentially the staff did a great job, and the only one she didn't mention was herself. So Michelle did an outstanding job in leadership on this. So thanks.
Thank you. Other comments or discussion on the motion? Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thinking about the issue that we talked about earlier relative to black sea bass. So how important is it that we resolve that particular issue, and how would we do it? So I'm thinking that if in fact we go the other way and decide that we need to extend that line to Hatteras, what does that mean? What would that mean for, South Atlantic Council habitat conversations? Is it going to complicate things, or is that where we may end up?
Yeah, I think if you wanted to eliminate that overlap, then if we wanted to extend further south to include that smaller part of the management unit, South Atlantic would have to take some action to eliminate that piece. However, I don't think that this is as much of an issue in terms of the designation process, because the essential fish habitat designations, we're required to describe them everywhere that EFH occurs, right? For spawning, feeding, breeding. It doesn't say that you're constrained to the management unit for those individual species. Obviously, you'd like to include the whole management unit if possible, but for our other species, we do designate outside of the management unit. For example, for surf clams, we are designating further inshore beyond the management unit. You can designate further offshore if we had data to go out into international waters. You could potentially include that. Like consultations probably won't happen out there, but you could. That constraint isn't on there that EFH has to be bound to that unit. And I'll just say in some of these designations, we do go outside of that. Like chub mackerel, we're all the way into the Gulf of Mexico, you know, and all the way inshore. So that's outside of the EEZ. So I just wanted to point that out.
So
I-
how would that relate to black sea bass? Because we're talking about truncating our management unit for black sea bass, yet you're talking about extending it into other areas for other species. And I just want to be consistent in terms of our approach, make sure that whatever we have in the document, whatever we're proposing makes sense to the agency, and then we don't have an issue with the South Atlantic.
So I don't think it's an issue. These maps are created to trigger an essential fish habitat consultation. So whether it's our map that extends down into that little piece of the management unit, or if it's the South Atlantic that extends up for black sea bass, if a project developer drops a pin on a map within that area, black sea bass is going to come up. And if black sea bass comes up, then it's then going to trigger next steps through a consultation process with either our South Atlantic counterparts or our Northeast counterparts within their regional offices. So from a practical perspective, I don't think it creates an issue. And I don't think it creates an issue with the regulations themselves, because we do have some breadth there in the EFH regulations. It's not bound to a management unit, but does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You explained the thing I was concerned about, which is, you know, someone needs a consultation. Are they going to be confused about who to consult with? But the way you described it, it makes sense. And, you know, depending on what you all choose, if you decide that it is important to address this, I would say we are working on, I was sort of looking at our work plan and a vehicle to do this, because we're not working on a habitat amendment right now, but we are working on a black sea bass amendment. So, you know, if it becomes important, I agree that I think maybe it's not, but that's y'all's call to make. I can see a vehicle for it, but we would probably need to make that determination sooner rather than later, because we are progressing with black sea bass right now.
Thanks, Gary. Mike Bentney?
Yeah, I think this is something maybe just sort of put a pin in it, and when my staff are back, we can have a conversation. I guess and I don't understand, you know, I don't know the nuances and the details of how the consultation process works and our mapping tools that we provide to developers and agencies. But, you know, I guess my concern would be somebody's doing a project off of Duck, and they put a pin where their project is, and it comes up, it's fluke and sea bass, EFH. And they're told they have to go consult with us on fluke and the Southeast region on black sea bass. I don't know if that's what would happen, but that would be kind of my concern, is having these dual consultations for projects in that area between, you know, off North Carolina down to Hatteras. But I think we can talk with staff once they're back working and figure out a plan forward.
Yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, and I can confirm, so like our summer flounder designation extends all the way down to Florida. If a pin gets dropped on a map down in Florida, it's the Southeast region that handles it, because they're handling projects within that region. So I think the key is just getting coverage on the map so that pin is dropped, and then it can trigger with the appropriate regional office, because they're also working with their regional Army Corps of Engineers or other groups that are in those different districts. So it tends to be regionalized. Same thing for chub. The pin gets dropped and it's chub in the Gulf. It's the Gulf region. It's not necessarily coming up to the Northeast. I do know that that's how that piece works. So, but the concern was overlapping is not helpful. That piece of overlap does create confusion there because the descriptions were different. So. But we can follow up.
Yeah, sounds good. Jim Gilmore had a sign up.
Yeah, just, and having been a regulator many years ago to major projects, the attorneys love this stuff. When they suddenly see there's a discrepancy, whatever, they'll argue to death, whatever. So just as a suggestion, and you could explore whatever, would there be a way to put another key on there that would extend that it has, you know, essentially it would be essential fish habitat within the mid-Atlantic, but it's a different, you know, the shading changes or whatever, something just to have it clarify that it's a crossover between the two councils, whatever, and that might solve the problem. But again, I think I don't think it's a big deal, but again, having been in many development hearings with big projects, they love these inconsistencies. So I think it's something we should probably try to fix. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Any other discussion on the motion? Not seeing any hands from council. I'll look to the public. Is there any comments on the motion before us? Not seeing any in the room. Okay. Not seeing any online. All right, so I'll ask, is there any objection to the motion? Not seeing any. Great. We'll consider this approved by consent. And Jessica, just checking, are you all set then?
We are all set and an hour ahead of schedule.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Chris for a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick issue before we go to break. So Jessica and I discussed whether or not we needed an in-person public hearing for this particular document. And right now, I think on your schedule, Jessica, you say to be determined, but December, Washington, we're going to have an in-person public hearing. So I struggle with that because I'm wondering if people are actually going to show up, right? All the other public hearings are virtual. I expect that those will be well attended, but I'm not expecting that we're going to get a lot of people in person in DC. Jessica said that at the Ecosystem Committee meeting, they had a discussion about having it in conjunction with the council meeting, but that would just be you all. So, you know, again, I don't think that would be a good idea necessarily, but I'm just curious what other folks think that have thought about it, if anybody's thought about it. But, you know, if we just had all virtual public hearings, I think we'd be fine. I think we get a lot of public input. So anyway, just something that we could discuss since we have a little time right now.
Laura, you're it. But I'm going to go to Mike first, and then I'll go to Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think if you're going to have a meeting on this issue in any place in the Mid-Atlantic, DC is probably the one place that you would get some people. I think some of the organizations that center out of DC, some of the groups that we interact with headquarters, you know, maybe in DC, maybe you'd see a little bit more interest. So that's my only thought on that. I think you would get just as much interest online as well. So if you wanted to be able to say to the public, if you didn't have access to software and ways to do this virtually, and we don't want to leave ourselves open to criticism for not having an availability for the general public to come to a meeting, I would say virtual is okay. But if you want to close the loop and tighten the whole thing up and have that one meeting, it's not the end of the world if nobody shows up.
Great.
I think Mike took some of the wind out of my sail there, but I kind of agree with what he said there, you know, but I think that most of the work's been done and the groundwork. I think you could move probably right along with it and save that step as well. You know, I think that, you know, it's been put out there. Everybody's been seeing it, you know, understands it and everything. But if you were going to have a meeting, I think that DC would be the place. So I agree with him there.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this has been a slow roll in some ways. the elements of this have been in front of the public for some time. So I think that's a good thing. I think, I'm very interested to see the kind of attendance and comments we get. So I'm going to go to Lori and then Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to disagree and go with Chris. I think Washington, you may collect some organizations, but I think it's a real disadvantage to the industry, recreational, commercial. I think it's a real disadvantage to them. It's December 15th, a week before Christmas. I think if the other 4 are designated for specific states, the way we normally would do, and you wanted to flip-flop and turn one of the other state ones into an in-person versus the DC, but I think it's a real disadvantage to the industry. And Christmas too, I don't know, maybe I'm a girl, so I'm thinking Christmas. Not maybe I'm a girl. Maybe that's why I'm thinking Christmas, but I just think it's bad.
Thank you, Lori. Jim?
And I don't have a problem with this one. It's that we do it all virtual. It's just becoming the more generic issue of it. When we did the committee meeting, there was a lot of people on that call, and I got the sense there's a lot of people that would have liked to have said something that didn't, and that's the general problem with doing all this stuff virtually. So this one is fine if we don't do one because of what, Lori just said, yeah, it's like Christmas and everything, no one's going to show up anyway. But is there something to the effect, and I knew they do this with the commission, it's like, all right, so we're not going to do council meetings, but can each state do an individual hearing if they decided they wanted to do one without even having staff support? Is that an option that people could take depending upon the issue that the director of marine fisheries in New York decides he wants to do a hearing on this, get the materials from staff, and then, give the option of having a meeting like that? Thanks.
So I think, in the past, if a state director has asked for a public hearing on any topic, we've accommodated that particular request. In this particular case, we could do the same thing, but you would want to have staff support there, given the technical nature of this particular document and all the stuff that's embedded in it and the work that Tori and Jessica have done. You would want to have that staff support. So I would say that, in fact, if there's someone sitting around this table who thinks that this is a hot topic for their state, to let us know, and then we'll set up the in-person public hearing for that particular state, right? Sounds like, based on the conversation we just had, that DC may not be the ideal place, or it may be an okay place, but not in December. So if we all could agree that we'll get input from the states, see if there's anyone here that really wants to have an in-person public hearing, and then we'll have at least one in-person public hearing. If we have a lot of states interested, then we can accommodate that with a couple, right? But most of the public hearings will be virtual. Okay. So Jessica, are you okay with that? Is there anything that I missed relative to? Okay, thank you.
Michelle, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess maybe just to, draw folks back to the discussion that the committee and advisors had, staff have kind of whittled down, the proposed list of hearings, which Jessica, I think it was actually like 9, maybe something like that, because we received some pretty strong feedback, and particularly from our advisors that, folks felt like that was too many public hearings. So, I appreciate Chris's generosity in, allowing for any additional public hearings that, states might want. And, certainly if that's a desire, we want to try to accommodate that. But, I also, part of the discussion there was just fatigue in terms of, a number of different topics that, we're asking industry and other members of the public to comment on. So just wanting to make sure we, keep that feedback in mind that we got from our advisors and, make sure we're striking the right balance in terms of the total number of hearings, virtual or in person. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Joe Gross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just thinking through this and all the comments, and I agree with all the things that are being said on both sides, because yeah, it's a tough time of year to be doing anything, Christmas and everything. What would be the effect? I'm just going to throw this out there, and Bob's in the room, so who can slap my hands for this one? What would be the effect if we shifted the time period for the public comment by 1 week? That means it would overlap the ASMFC meeting at the first week of February. And maybe we could jointly grab an evening there in Northern Virginia for an in-person instead of having to try to do the DC one in December. Just throwing that out there logistically, if that would be a possibility, and if it doesn't mess up our timeline.
Bob, do you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, ASMSC can absolutely find a meeting room or something, one evening during our February meeting if that works for this council, but it's up to the council if they want to take advantage of that. And I don't know, other than moving it away from the holidays, I'm not sure Northern Virginia and DC are all that different as far as who you're going to get to show up. I mean, I think it'll be a similar group of people in Northern Virginia and DC.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Joe, for the suggestion. Yeah, I mean, I think that should just be another option that's put into the category that Chris discussed, which is let's all, go back and figure out what works best here, but we can certainly discuss that as well. Okay. All right. With that, I think we're all set on this agenda item, and thank you, everyone. And so that is to be determined on how we're going to handle the potential in-person public hearing. So we'll keep everyone informed on that. Our next agenda item is the on-demand gear framework, but we're going to take a quick break. So if we can come back in 15 minutes, so that'll be 10:25. We'll resume with the gear marking. All right, welcome back, everybody. As I mentioned, we're going to get started on the on-demand gear framework. We had NIMS staff on the agenda. We have Hayden here with us from council staff who is going to kick this off for us, and then I'll turn it over to the regional administrator. But go ahead, Hayden.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. As a reminder, today the council is considering taking final action on the alternative gear marking framework. GARFO has led the development of this action, and it is being considered jointly by the New England and Mid-Atlantic councils. So just last month, the New England Council decided to postpone final action on this framework until additional information on ropeless gear and visualization technology, as solicited through a NIMS request for information, is available to inform stakeholder input and council decision-making. This presentation does not include details on the request for information, but thankfully we have Mr. Bentley here who will be able to provide some information on that after we review the contents of the framework. This action considers allowing alternative or digital gear marking as another option to the currently required physical surface markings for fixed gear fisheries in the Northeast region. Current regulations require fixed gear to be marked with surface markers such as radar reflectors, pennants, high flyers, and buoys, which necessitates the use of persistent buoy lines to connect these surface markers to fixed gear that sits on the seafloor. By changing the gear marking regulations to allow gear to be alternatively or digitally marked, fishermen could choose to use gear without persistent buoy lines, such as on-demand fishing gear or timed retrieval gear in certain areas and times. Before we move on to some more background and rationale for this framework, I want to highlight a few points. First, if approved, this action would not immediately result in the use of alternative gear marking, as gear marking devices and technologies would still have to be approved for use by the regional administrator. Also, changes to gear marking regulations could apply to some or all fixed gear fisheries in the northeastern US. This action would not limit the use of current gear marking methods, and this action would not mandate the use of alternative gear marking or on-demand fishing gear. In 1997, NIMS implemented the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Plan to reduce deaths and serious injuries of large whales, specifically right humpback and fin whales, from incidental entanglement in U.S. fixed gear commercial fisheries, including traps and pots and gillnet. In 2021, this take reduction plan was modified to address North Atlantic right whale entanglement risk in the northeastern American lobster and Jonah crab trap pot fisheries. Restricted areas were expanded and modified from seasonal fishing closures to persistent buoy line closures. In other words, lobster and Jonah crab fishermen could now access seasonal closures by fishing with on-demand or ropeless gear. Because current gear marking regulations for fixed gear require the use of physical surface markers, fishermen must acquire an exempted fishing permit to use alternatively marked gear in these areas. Changing gear marking regulations could allow for increased fishing access in the future for fixed gear fishermen impacted by these take reduction plan restricted areas. Therein lies the rationale for this framework, which is to provide fixed gear fishermen additional harvest opportunities and greater flexibility in their business operations if and when alternative gear markings are approved for use in the future. Before we move on, I also want to flag that the 2021 modifications to the take reduction plan only applied to lobster and Jonah crab. So seasonal gillnet closures in Cape Cod Bay and the Great South Channel remain closed to all gillnet fishing regardless of whether the gear has a persistent buoy line. This means that only lobster and Jonah crab fishermen would benefit from a change in gear marking regulations in the short term. However, future modifications to the take reduction plan could transition gillnet closures into persistent buoy line closures. The take reduction team has delayed their next round of deliberations until next fall, so we won't know until that time what measures might be considered. So this is alternative set 1, which considers where approved gear marking alternatives could be authorized for use. And the way that I think of this is that it outlines the potential spatial and temporal guardrails that the council could choose for alternative gear marking to occur within. Alternative 1A is no action, so this alternative would not allow for alternative gear marking and would continue to require the currently required surface markings. Alternative 1B would allow the use of alternative gear marking region-wide in all federal waters in the greater Atlantic region from Maine through Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Alternative 1C is the most restrictive option. It would allow for alternative gear marking just within take reduction plan restricted areas in those areas when they are in effect. And then alternative 1B is more of a middle ground where alternative gear marking would be limited to these restricted areas, but it could occur there year round regardless of when the restricted area would actually be in effect. And I'll note that if the Mid-Atlantic and New England Fishery Management Councils choose an alternative other than no action under this alternative set, then NIMS would also consider changing the gear marking regulations for American lobster. I mentioned before that this action would not result in the immediate use of alternative gear marking, as gear marking systems would still need to be approved for use through a process separate from this framework. For this potential approval process, the Garfield Regional Administrator would evaluate which devices and technologies are functionally equivalent to traditional surface markers. So would they allow for the deployment, retrieval, and location marking, sharing, and displaying of fixed gear without physical surface markers? And the regional administrator would also consider where each gear marking alternative should be approved for use. And these considerations would be made within the spatial and temporal guardrails chosen by the councils through alternative set 1. While functional equivalence is not included as a decision point in the suite of framework alternatives, GARFO has invited the councils to provide input on what elements would make alternative gear marking functionally equivalent to current surface markers. The PDT FMAT identified some key functions of current physical surface markers that alternative markers should reproduce, recognizing that these elements could be further refined through stakeholder input. You can see here that certain elements were prioritized as essential, while others were listed as beneficial. And so let's briefly walk through these elements. Under essential, we have detectability, meaning that those that need to operate with or around alternatively marked gear must be able to locate the gear. Retrievability, gear must have an identified means of retrieval. Identification, gear is marked with identifying information, such as the name of the owner or vessel. Enforceability, enforcement can locate, retrieve, and redeploy gear as necessary. And then moving on to beneficial, the first element here is viewing distance. So gear can be detected from a similar minimum distance as current surface markings. In the current research phase for the use of on-demand gear, mariners can see gear set locations within a 5 nautical mile radius of their location. Set direction, the gear set direction is identifiable. And then timing, meaning that gear location is accessible by others at the time of deployment and while it persists in the water. While the PDT FMAT has placed this under beneficial, there has been feedback that timing is an essential element and that ocean users should be able to see gear locations in near real time to avoid gear conflict. Advisors to the New England Council and members of the public have expressed concern regarding whether this approval process will be public-facing, and there's been questions about what the process would actually look like. Recognizing these concerns, the PDT FMAT identified 3 existing approval processes that the gear marking approval process could be modeled after, including the approval process for EVTR, vessel monitoring systems, and monitoring service providers. Now moving on to alternative set 2, this alternative set considers whether a letter of authorization should be required for fishermen to use alternative gear marking, and whether acquiring an LOA should be contingent upon completing a demonstration of knowledge. The thought here is that a knowledge demonstration could help reduce the likelihood of inaccurate gear location marking, which could lead to gear conflict, unsuccessful gear retrievals, and reduced fishermen safety. And an LOA could allow for monitoring and oversight of the use of alternative gear marking. So alternative 2A is no action. This would not require a person to demonstrate knowledge of how to mark gear with any approved gear marking alternatives. Alternative 2B has the LOA requirement paired with a demonstration of knowledge. So this would require a person to obtain an LOA documenting that they have demonstrated knowledge of how to mark gear with an approved gear marking alternative. And then alternative 2C is just the LOA requirement, which would require a person to obtain an LOA to use a gear marking alternative and would not require the demonstration of knowledge to obtain that LOA. This table summarizes the expected impacts of framework alternatives on each of the valued ecosystem components relative to current conditions. That includes fishery resources, habitat or essential fish habitat, protected resources, and human communities. Starting with the columns for fishery resources and essential fish habitat, you see a lot of zeros. This is because while alternative gear marking could lead fishermen to change where and when they fish in the future, none of the alternatives would allow for increased fishing effort or harvest levels for any species, and changing how you mark gear would not alter how fixed gear interacts with bottom habitat. Also, alternative set 2 is administrative in nature and would not impact these components. Impacts for protected species, which are protected under the Endangered Species Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act, vary depending on species. For example, there are species protected under the MMPA that have documented interactions with pot, trap, or gillnet gear. Some are in poor condition, while other species maintain good condition despite interactions with fixed gear. Overall impacts of alternative set 1 on protected species range from moderate negative to positive, depending on the species. Alternative set 2 is not expected to have direct impacts on protected species because alternative set 2 is administrative in nature. However, indirect negative impacts could result from 2A and 2C if improper gear marking results in ghost gear from gear conflict. And 2B could have indirect benefits to protected species by reducing gear conflict, which could reduce ghost gear and entanglement risk. Finally, an analysis was done to attempt to quantify the economic impact of alternative set 1 on human communities. And the analysis suggests a discrepancy in which vessels would be profitable enough to adopt alternative gear marking technology. So the impacts there range from negative to positive. Any costs under alternative set 2 would have to do with the time spent fulfilling an educational requirement and the potential benefit of more accurate gear marking as a result of the demonstration of knowledge requirement. So the impacts there range from slight negative to slight positive. Most feedback received on this framework at meetings where GARFO staff have presented on the action has not been on specific alternatives included in the framework, but on the process of developing on-demand gear as a usable gear type and the approval process of gear marking alternatives following this framework. Questions and comments have been raised regarding a range of topics, so we'll walk through these. Firstly, there's been questions of whether ocean users outside of fixed gear fisheries would be required to visualize buoyless gear. Questions about how other ocean users would be made aware of the presence of buoyless gear. How conflict between buoyless gear and other gear types would be mitigated and resolved. If real-time marking is necessary and feasible in terms of internet access at sea. Whether alternative gear marking would contribute to ghost gear. There are also concerns expressed about fishermen's safety if they were to use buoyless gear or if other ocean users were to operate in the same area as buoyless gear. There are concerns about equity, including the concern that smaller vessels may be excluded from buoy line closures if they can't afford to invest in alternative gear marking technology. And also there was a general concern about the cost of alternative gear marking systems, as well as systems needed to visualize buoyless gear. I'll note that currently on-demand devices that replace buoy lines cost several hundred to several $1,000s, and vessel technology to communicate with those devices typically costs several $1,000s. There was concern about the location accuracy of digital gear markings, and given that the Atlantic large whale take reduction team delayed its deliberations from this fall to next fall, there was feedback that the timing of this action is premature. There's also feedback that this action has been developed quickly and that the lobster industry in particular was not aware of the action and not sufficiently engaged. And there were also concerns that the process for approving gear marking alternatives, which would occur separately from this framework, would not be sufficiently public facing. And finally, there have been comments in support of restoring access to restricted areas under the Atlantic large whale take reduction plan. Now, moving on to some feedback that the Mid-Atlantic Council has received specifically. The Mid-Atlantic Council received 6 unique public comments on this framework. 2 letters were received that supported a delay in final action. There was 1 letter in opposition to delaying final action. 1 letter was received in support of alternative 1A, which is no action for alternative set 1. 1 letter was in support of 1B, which would allow for region-wide alternative gear marking. And 1 letter was received in support of region-wide alternative gear marking paired with the LOA and demonstration of knowledge requirement. And I'll note that the letter received in support of alternative 1B was submitted as a spreadsheet containing 16,925 comments that were mostly identical or substantially identical. Given that the post-framework process for approving gear marking alternatives is not well defined at this point, and given feedback that the lobster industry has not been sufficiently engaged, council staff has made a recommendation to ensure that all stakeholders potentially impacted by this action have the opportunity to provide input on the approval process and where and when alternative gear marking should be approved for use in the future. Staff recommend that if the council chooses an alternative other than no action now or at a later date, that prior to initiating an approval process, GARFO work with the councils and ASMFC to conduct stakeholder outreach, and that any gear marking approval requests be published in the Federal Register for public comment. This is just an overview of the action timeline from initiation of the action in April to where we stand today in October with the Mid-Atlantic Council considering final action. And you'll see that next to 2026, the request for information from NIMS is listed there. So with that, I will turn over the mic to Mr. Penny. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Hayden. Good job giving our presentation for us. Sorry that staff can't be here to cover it. So as Hayden noted at the very beginning, there was a motion by the New England Fishery Management Council to delay final action on the framework, in part because of a lot of the questions and concerns that Hayden described and summarized from the industry, not just from the lobster industry, but from the mobile gear fleet and for hire recreational fishermen and others, that there just wasn't a lot of clarity in terms of how the gear marking would work in terms of avoiding gear conflicts. And so one of the things that we did kind of in response to a lot of that feedback over the summer was look at doing what's called a request for information, where it's kind of like a proposed rule, but there's no actual rules, and it's just really a request that we would solicit information from basically all the stakeholders. So fishermen that would be potentially using the gear, what sort of characteristics would they look for in gear that they would feel comfortable using? From the mobile gear fleet, what are some of the parameters that they would want to make sure are in the approval process? Things such as distance, from the location before it appears on a chart plotter. What information would they want to have access to? They need to see the direction that the set, the trawl is set. Do they want to see both end lines marked on the chart plotter? Those sorts of questions I think would be really useful. But also requests for information from the developers. What are the technological sort of capabilities of the gear that exists now? Where do they think things will be, in 2 to 3 to 5 years in terms of the evolution of the technology? And we would be able to, through a request for information, ask a series of questions that get at a lot of the questions that we heard during over the summer during the development of this action, and then develop a report and bring that back to the councils potentially in June of next year. Provide the councils a report that addresses a lot of those questions and concerns that we heard based on the information that we collect through the request for information, and then that could be used to inform the councils in terms of taking a final action. So we discussed that at the New England Council meeting a couple of weeks ago. We explained that would be our proposed next step. Instead of taking final action at these meetings, we would, over the course of the next couple months, prepare and publish this request for information, probably hold it open, ensure it's open for at least enough time to get multiple council meetings, commission meeting, as well as providing the public a good opportunity to look at the questions we have and think about it and provide feedback. So that by the spring, we should be able to start preparing a report and bring that back to the councils late spring, early summer of next year. So I think with that, everybody around the table at the New England Council felt comfortable, as Hayden described, passing a motion that would delay final action until the council has a chance to receive the report that we would prepare and consider the implications of that report. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll kick it back to you, but I suspect that, the next thing would be for someone to make a like motion as what the New England Council did a couple of weeks ago, and then see where we go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm going to go to Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one clarification for the record. Hayden, we received over 16,000 individual comments in support of 1B. Not right? Okay, just so folks understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a clear path forward here, but I still, since we just moved off the presentation, I will look to the council for questions first. Any questions on this? Okay. Not seeing any. Oh, sorry. Oh, Bobby, go ahead. Sorry, Bobby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've raised this question before, and it was something that was raised in New England. And the temperature up there for this particular action is about what you expect. There hasn't been, there's a lot of discussion on what's considered real time, what's considered visibility to non-fixed gear fishermen. But I haven't really seen or heard of any studies that are actually going to be done for mobile gear fishermen or any other ocean user for detectability. And my personal thoughts is the technology is not here. I mean, it's great in concept, but this is certainly not ready to be rolled out. I mean, having the ability to fish inside of a closed area or a current closed area was kind of the teaser that was thrown out initially to get industry buy-in. There hasn't been any confirmation that that's actually going to be able to happen. I know some states have already said that regardless of the gear type used, if it's a state closed area, it's going to remain a closed area. And looking broadly, I don't see for the mid where the need lies. I mean, this is for industry wise, it's an extremely costly burden. It's, in my opinion, still unproven technology. And then you have the myriad of other aspects where, there's not just fixed gear guys that are going to be utilizing this. We need to be able to see it. And it's just the amount of unknowns definitely outweigh the knowns. So I was just curious if there is anybody, or if there is plans in the near future to kind of address the visibility issues and in the real time issues. Just have the simple question of what quantifies as real time. I mean, me as a mobile gear fisherman, if I'm fishing in an area where I'm either against a lobster gear area or I'm just approaching fixed gear, real time to me is looking out my window and seeing how close I am to that buoy, not where it was on a computer 12 hours ago or possibly 24 hours ago. I mean, tidal shifts, everything else could cause a lot of change. And it's also a liability issue for me because theoretically, if I have an interaction with that gear and I damage that gear, do I got to pay for it? It wasn't my fault. I was trying to stay away from it. But if I can't see it, then, that's going to be another can of worms that we're going to have to figure out. So I think in concept, it may be a nice idea for New England. It is certainly not something that we need to bring out in the Mid-Atlantic at this point. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think going through some of the public comments and seeing these presentations over time now, I almost see like a list of research recommendations coming out of what's been talked about and presented, because it does seem like there are some, in my mind anyway, some unanswered questions there. But and so I don't know if you put out a rhetorical question on potential studies, or if anyone knows of anything that may be currently happening or coming up. And I imagine to some extent, Mike, that's part of what we're seeking from the manufacturers and producers of this stuff, is just how far they've gone and what they can really, I guess, just demonstrate, right? So.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we're hearing a lot of those questions. I think, the relevance to probably the Mid-Atlantic Council is more, I don't know, Hayden, if you can throw the map back up. One of the areas where theoretically this could be allowed would be the South Island area, which arguably is off the coast of Rhode Island and Massachusetts, but I think it's more, at least, some of the Mid-Atlantic Council fisheries certainly take place in that area. And, you know, between February and April. So, you know, at least potentially, you know, if this were to move forward and that area were to be approved for use of the on-demand gear, then, you know, you might see it in that area. I know that the technology has evolved a lot over the last couple of years in terms of the geolocation and it being available on a variety of chart plotters. I don't think, you know, to the specific question about how long does it take, I think that's one of the things that we want to find out and confirm that, you know, some of the technology for the on-demand gear itself, where it's going is instead of having to push a button to remember to push a button that the gear has been deployed, as soon as the gear hits the water, it triggers a signal to the satellite that the gear is has been deployed. That reduces user error. It also increases the timeliness in terms of when the information is uploaded, that the gear exists in the water. And then the question is, how long does it take to get back, you know, and show up on the chart plotter? Is that something that happens within seconds, within minutes, within hours? And that's something that I think we need to resolve as part of this request for information. So there is a lot, you know, a lot of unanswered questions, admittedly. We are continuing to work with a number of fishermen, including some mobile gear fishermen, in our exempted fishing permits that are working on the gear and working on the visualization part of it as well. So I think there's potentially a lot to be gained from the request for information. One of the things we'll also ask about in that is what type of approval process should we be developing for approving the technology, approving the different options. You know, Hayden showed a couple of different examples where, you know, we set up the parameters and the regulations, and then somebody applies and we have a separate review process. We do something similar with the lobster fleet where, you know, weak rope, weak links, the basic parameters are in the regulations, but then all of the individual contrivances and things that people develop are tested separately, and we maintain a list of what's been approved for use without having to go back and change the regulations each time. So those are just some examples and different approaches that we've used for something similar.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Lori, you want to?
Thank you. Mike, so does this mean that all vessels in the ocean are going to have some sort of new program connected to their plotters in order to be able to read these signals that this gear will give off to let you know where it is?
Well, you know, I think all vessels in the ocean, probably not.
Fishing.
Vessels that are fishing in these areas and in these times. I mean, so like, let's say it's the South Island restricted area. It's February, March, April. So vessels fishing, if it was approved in the South Island area, then vessels fishing in the South Island area, February, March, April, would want to have the technology capable of seeing the on-demand gear.
Right.
We're working with the, you know, chart plotter manufacturers so that it's available if you have, you know, internet. So if you've got Starlink, for example, and you've got, is it time zero chart plotter, then it shows up on your chart plotter.
Okay.
But, you know, we're trying to make sure that this is the sort of thing that's available across multiple chart plotter platforms. We heard at the New England Council meeting, instead of needing you know, a Starlink internet connection on the vessel, there may be other technologies that could be cheaper that would pick up a signal and be able to display it on a chart plotter. So we're looking at those different technologies, what options there are. But then again, it would be vessels fishing in the times and places where these gear restricted areas exist, would be the ones that would need to have that technology.
Okay.
Lori, follow up?
kind of a comment. I just want to say, you know, the industry has come a really long way. And whether you're a trawler, a lobster guy, a pot fisherman, a longline guy, everybody's really working together these days and communicating and minimizing gear conflicts. Like, I feel everyone goes out of their way to minimize gear conflicts these days. And it'll be a shame if we go backwards. And I hope the technology is available to everyone. And, you know, I know my phone has plenty of dead spots and it doesn't work. And I just hope it's a really good system that allows everyone to continue to work together and not create the gear conflicts and gear loss and things like that, because we've come a long way.
Follow up from Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. And I know, no one wants to run over the gear. No one wants to, if fishermen are investing in this technology, it's not cheap. And they don't want to risk that if they don't have confidence that it's not going to get trawled up or other people are going to hang up on it. But the bottom line is these areas, you look at these areas, South Island is closed for 3 months every year. Massachusetts restricted area is closed for 3 months every year. What we're trying to do is provide an opportunity. If there's a technology that would let lobstermen go about their business and fish without risk of entangling large whales, we want to see if we can make that happen for them, right? And there's a lot at stake in trying to do that, but ultimately that's the goal, is to try to provide them the opportunity to go fishing instead of being shut out of these areas for 3 months every year.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think that sentiment is important to remind people of once in a while. So I have one more hand, and then as the RA pointed out, there is a motion from the New England Council. So I'm going to go to Ted Platts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to point out, like, the South Island restricted area is really lucrative grounds for fixed gear, the Jonah crab fleet, the lobster fleet. And, as a fisherman, I agree with Bobby completely that there are huge costs here for the fixed gear guys. I think the technology with time zero, and I think a lot of boats already have Starlink, so maybe it's less for the mobile gear guys. But there are costs with being locked out of sections of the ocean for months at a time, and it's important that we don't underappreciate those costs. I look at that area as a monk fisherman and a skate fisherman. I'm not going to say that right now we have an exemption and we can go fishing in there. The crab guys are gone, which has opened up a lot of ground and been kind of nice. But if they tell us that we have to go, I don't know if it will be a fatal blow to the Southern New England fixed gear, gillnet, skate monk guys, but it'll be close to it. It may be for some. And so, that's the other half of the cost equation, is that getting locked out of areas has real costs too. It's opportunity cost. And I understand the entrenched and passionate vision that some lobstermen have, because they think this is going to come everywhere. And I think it's our duty as council members to make sure that that doesn't happen, that we don't let some special interests impose a cost on industry where there's no benefit. And if there's other areas in the mid-Atlantic, there's no benefit to having these, then why in the world would you want to have them? We don't want an outside group to impose costs without benefits. But with these closed areas, there are costs with benefits, and we have to weigh and balance them. And so I look at this as a life raft. I invest in it every year, every couple of years. I don't ever want to use it, but the first time I need it, it paid for itself. And that's kind of what developing the technology to get into these areas comes down to. When you need it, you're going to want it. And so, we need to get further down the road because it isn't there yet, but we want to keep moving it closer to being there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate that. So Yeah, and I've heard a lot of good comments, and a lot of them, I think, speak to the idea that more information being gathered is only going to be a helpful thing. So I'll ask staff, do we have New England's motion? And we'll see what the pleasure of the council is if we wish to mirror that language, since this is a final action.
Unfortunately, my clicker is not working to get to the motion, so I'll troubleshoot that with Stephen.
Yeah, it looks like we're moving along here.
Stephen, it'll be the first slide after the additional slides. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we do have a draft motion. I'll give folks a second to read that and see if we have someone interested in making that motion on behalf of the MID. I see Sunny Gwen. Okay, thank you, Sunny. And actually, Sunny, if you want to, if you'd be willing to read that in, and then I'll see if we have a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the council postpone final action on an alternative gear marking framework until additional information on ropeless gear and visualization technology as solicited through a National Marine Fisheries Service request for information is available to inform stakeholder input and council decision-making.
Thank you very much. Motion by Sunny Gwen. Do I have a second? Bobby Rule. Okay. Sunny, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I would. And I think Bobby Rule spelled it out really good. And this is the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Bobby, any follow-up?
Yeah, this is consistent with ASMFC and what New England's done. So just for consistency's sake.
Very good. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion, council? Not seeing any. I'll look to the public. Any comment from the public on this motion? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. With that, I will ask the council, I'll call the question here. Is there any objection to this motion? Not seeing any. Very good. So we'll consider that approved by consent. Again, thank you, Hayden. Appreciate the presentation and the pinch hitting for all of that. Anything else here that we need, or are we good on this?
All good.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, with that, we're a little ahead of schedule. We would like to move down the agenda a bit. I think we'd like to keep spiny dogfish after lunch. So the next agenda item would be the joint New England Mid-Atlantic Monkfish Specification Framework, also a final action. I'll give Jason a few seconds to settle in. Thank you, Jason, for coming up. So as you get ready there. You all set?
So Stephen, can you bring up the monkfish presentation? Clicker seems to be working again. Okay, thank you. We're looking at monkfish specifications under this agenda item. Jenny Couture is the New England lead. With these joint plans, spiny dogfish in New England sometimes will switch out if travel plans kind of make it easier. So it was we prearranged for me to do this presentation today. Two parts. I'm going to talk about development of the specs, potential effort controls, and then go to the council discussion motions. So again, setting, New England's was originally trying to set 2026 to 2030 specifications. Those include overfishing limits. There are two stock areas, north and south here. Whether or not there actually are two stocks is under debate and scientific evaluation, but that will probably come up in the next monkfish assessment. We were going to have a research track, but that's been delayed, so we don't know when that will happen. But I'm sure at the next assessment there will be additional discussion of if and how to separate the monkfish stocks. There's also an extra little component of this.
potentially allowing NIMS to automatically deal with some accountability measures. Right now, the council has to start that process. Just an artifact of how it was set up. So that's another little tweak in this action. This slide is just summarizing monkfish landings in the northern area. And you can see in recent years been relatively stable. And when you look at their annual quota utilization line, they have a pretty orderly and full utilization of their quota in recent years. For the southern area, it's a different story. There's been a kind of pretty long erosion of landings in the southern area. So a lot of discussion over the years why that is. Is it abundance? Is it availability? Is it interactions with skates? There's probably a mixed reason for that trend. Also market issues. Just a sense, this is just across both of the management areas. Tori helped us put together a map just to get a sense of where monkfish landings are occurring by stat area over time. And you can kind of see that area around north and south of Cape Cod and southern New England being kind of the primary areas, but landings are widely distributed on the shelf. So there was supposed to be a management track assessment for monkfish. The center wasn't able to do that. Instead, they did provide a data update, which included some updated indices. So these are the index trends for north on the left and south on the right, and fall on the top and spring on the bottom. Again, these are just kind of the raw index values. I highlighted when the Bigelow time series, when the Bigelow kind of comes online for this time series. Can't remember if these are converted Bigelow to Albatross or Albatross to Bigelow, but I think the Bigelow catches maybe about 10 times more monkfish as the Albatross did. And in previous peer reviews, there's general questioning by the peer reviewers of, are either one of these vessels creating a meaningful index for monkfish abundance, or is it just noise? And especially the Albatross, given how few monkfish it caught. So looking at 2024 monkfish ACL accounting, you can see they were right up 99.3% of the northern monkfish ACL was caught. And for the southern, only 40% of the southern monkfish ACL was caught. So again, just looking at a few recent years, northern on the left, southern on the right, and these are landings and discards. So total catch relative to the ACL. So again, the northern component has been catching pretty close to its ACL, and the southern not. So there's a comparison of current 25 and the proposed for the northern area 2026 through 2030. So basically pretty close to status quo, except discards are a little bit higher. The 10-year median is what is proposed to be used. That was up a bit. And so there's a 3% decrease in the TAL, the quota, because of that slightly higher discards. And that would be for 5 years, 26 through 30. The southern, different story. The proposed action is status quo for 26, 27, 28. But the New England SSC got concerned about setting, especially given the trends in the southern, for southern monkfish, got concerned about setting the status quo out for 29 and 30. So for 29 and 30, the New England SSC recommended a substantial reduction in the ABC based on scaling some recent catches based on the trend in the recent trend in the Bigelow survey that was calculated a few years ago. Again, that's kind of like a default if it doesn't get looked at again, but they were not. And we've seen some similar discussions at our SSC of, the further we're getting out from an assessment, potentially adding some precaution, and that's what they did here. So since the southern landings have been so low, it still may not be constraining on the southern fishery, even out in those out years, but it gets closer. So that's on the basic ACLs and quotas. In terms of effort controls, New England's got a lot of input that there are these interactions between skate and monkfish that are kind of limiting either one or both of the fisheries and deserve to try to be aligned. So this is kind of some input. They have been having a bunch of joint meetings of the monkfish and skate APs. This is going to be an ongoing discussion, but for monkfish purposes, no proposed changes at this time, given that the same quotas. But this is going to be an ongoing issue of how to align monkfish in skate. So, again, we've got skate prices faltering with the increase in landings. They really would like a steady price. And they run into overages of one or the other. They want some more flexibility. There are no proposed changes here. I'm not going to go through all these, but it's an ongoing issue that's liable to lead to some changes down the road, I think. So there was a joint monkfish and skate PDT meetings and a tasking. Again, trying to look at days at sea usage, looking at monkfish and skate landings by trip declaration, again, on this issue. And the takeaways, most vessels are underutilizing the monkfish days at sea allocation, a few overages, general decline over time. The A and B permit categories is a bunch of monkfish permit categories. The A and B permit categories use more monkfish days at sea in the south than north, less pronounced for C and D permits. There's over 200 permits on the shelf in CPH, confirmation of permit history. They're not on a vessel right now, but they could be put on a vessel. Northern monkfish landings are mostly from sector trips. Southern monkfish landings are mostly from monk-only trips. And again, that overall decline. 45% of monkfish days at sea trips landed less than 75% of the monkfish possession limit. So there's this kind of ongoing kind of detailed analysis of trying to figure out, what are there limitations on either one of these fisheries that can be rectified. Market issues are likely a huge issue for the decline in southern landings, but it's not totally clear. What's the mix between skate interactions, availability, abundance, markets, but the market has been tough for monkfish with declining prices since 2011. Okay, so looking at the APN committee. The monkfish AP generally favored, so I've simplified these a little bit from the slides in New England, but monkfish AP generally favored status quo ABCs for 3 years. Noting it's generally data poor. We need updated data. We need an actual assessment. We don't have an assessment. The iSmooth ABC adjusting procedure is not an assessment. And there's hope that monkfish may recover now that there's some concern that the offshore wind farm surveys were driving monkfish out, and they may recover. That's since those are gone. The Monkfish Committee struggled to pass recommendations at the committee level, so it kind of then got kicked to the New England Council, and we'll get to those in a minute. This is this trigger authority issue that's also wrapped up in this framework. It would eliminate the requirement for the councils to kind of initiate action for NIMS to implement annual catch target adjustments if there are overages, and would just let NIMS do it. So New England motions a couple weeks ago. The council recommended that the OFL for northern and southern monkfish management areas remain unknown. They recommended northern monkfish ABC of 6,224 metric tons for 26 and 28, and a southern monkfish ABC of 5,861 metric tons for 26 to 28. that they adopt status quo monkfish effort controls for northern and southern monkfish management areas and revisit those in 3 years, considering fishery performance and ongoing work on all those issues that may be constraining. And then they approved the Monkfish Framework adjustment specifications and that accountability measure operation tweak for submission to NOAA Fisheries. Again, there were some skate motions also, but we're just focusing on monkfish. We don't do skates. So I'll stop for questions. I'll note there's a potential draft motion. If the council wants to follow New England's lead, can use a simple motion to indicate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Nicely done. So questions for Jason around the table? Chris?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Jason, remind me why, when folks talk about that southern unit and the fact that the fishery hasn't achieved its quota over a period of how many years? 5 years? Like, do they talk about a reason, or do they talk about like low interest, or what's the deal?
Well, we have a monkfish fisherman at the table here, our New England liaison. I mean, you want to give it a go?
Yeah, so there's a variety of factors. I think the biggest factor driving the bus is the superabundance of skate. And they tend to fill the nets so fast that guys are fishing less nets, because if they fished what they historically fished, they'd be getting into a lot of discards and waste with the skate. They wouldn't be able to keep up. They hit the limit so fast. So everyone's fishing a lot less nets than they used to cope with the skate. So obviously they're going to catch less monk. As the skate fill the nets, you know, they tend to close them. You know, they don't die in the net. They're very active. The nets are, you know, they're all over the place. So I think it really reduces the amount the monk will go in the net. The net suddenly isn't this passive, hard to see thing anymore. There's COVID was certainly a problem. There's been a price decline that hurt. As we all know, crew availability and the quality of the crew that is available for what's a pretty arduous fishery is also limiting. So you have all these factors kind of coming together. A lot of the guys feel that the wind farms, all the testing did really may have killed off a lot of monkfish. There's definitely a temporal connection there. Whether that's real or perceived, I'm not in a position to say. But I think those are the things that are driving the bus. I personally had a slightly different experience because I fish a larger mesh net. And I found that they're very effective at reducing skate catch. And so my boat tended to catch more monk per trip. So I think there's a solution there, but there's a reluctance to go from a 12-inch net to, say, a 13. That you're only going to fish 2 months a year. That's a pretty significant cost. And your return on investment is going to take quite a while if you're just getting 1,000, 1,200 pounds more monk over a course of 8 weeks, and then you're putting that net in your yard for 8, 10 months. So, you would never fish that in the winter when you want the skate. So I think all those factors are coming together and making it a challenge to catch the monk. I think some guys think they're depleted, some guys don't. I personally do not, based on my experience fishing.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate that. Any other questions on the presentation? Not seeing any. I guess, Jason, you had mentioned New England's motion, so if we could, we'll have that up, and then we'll look around the table and see if there's an interest to have a similar motion. This is a final action. Okay, so a draft motion here would be a move to adopt New England Fishery Management Council's monkfish specifications and submit Framework 17 to NOAA Fisheries. Any interest amongst council members. Sonny, you making that motion? Okay, do we have a second to the motion? Bobby Rule. Okay. Sonny, do you want to speak to the motion?
It's mirroring what the Northeast Fisheries Council did. I think that'll be good.
Bobby, any additions?
No, it's just being consistent with New England.
Very good. Look to the council. Any further discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. This is the final action, so I'll look to the public. Is there any public comment on this motion? Okay. Not seeing any. With that, I'll ask the question. Is there any objection to this motion? Any abstentions? One, Mike Pentning. Okay, with that, we'll consider this passed by consent. Jason, anything else on this agenda item?
No, thank you.
Yep. Okay. So again, if we're skipping spiny dogfish till after lunch, the next agenda item up would be the New England Council's Omnibus Management Flexibility Amendment. And Jason, do you know if Jamie's ready to go or?
I believe so. Jamie, can you check your audio?
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Stephen, can you put up that the next the New England Omnibus presentation and be just the next one after? Thanks. Okay, Jamie, when you want us to advance the slide, just say next and we'll advance.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present on the Omnibus Management Flexibility Amendment prepared by the New England Fishery Management Council. Next slide. And your goal for today.
Can you just briefly introduce yourself fully, just
Sure.
so folks
Yeah,
listening
okay.
in. Thanks. Sorry I didn't do that, but
I'm happy to do that. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jamie Cornan. I work for the New England Fishery Management Council. I'm the council's lead for herring, and I also work with Jason on spiny dogfish. And this year I've been working with the council on an action that affects all of our fishery management plans. And it's in response to some of the recent changes that we have experienced as a council with changes in the administration. I've been with the New England Council for over 10 years, and I previously worked on the groundfish plan. Okay. With that, the goal for today for your meeting is to take final action on the monkfish aspects of the Omnibus Amendment. And this amendment is to increase management flexibility and consistency. Next slide, please. Recent events, including executive orders and changes to our federal agency structure and staffing and pause in the regulatory advancement of management actions, have highlighted the need for the council to consider increased flexibility in management and regulatory processes. Next slide. Some examples that we've experienced here in New England include the use of default measures in place for part of the fishing year for the Atlantic sea scallop fishery this year, delays in 2 actions, one right now for the groundfish plan and the herring plan, which would set specifications for the current fishing years we're in. And we know that there have been capacity reductions in federal staff that support data collection all the way through the stock assessments and ecosystem work. And this has impacted our plan development team's work. In addition, as you know, there's been reductions in the number of management track stock assessments that occurred for this year as well as planned for next year, and a pause in many of our research track stock assessments. Next slide. So the purpose of this action is to modify certain administrative measures across all of the council's fishery management plans in order to increase management flexibility and consistency. And we would do this ensuring the requirements of the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act and council objectives can be met, and in order to provide greater flexibility under our current regulatory framework. Next slide. This action has been a work that began at our April council meeting, where we added this as a mid-year priority. And then the council has met twice to first look across draft alternatives and review the action timeline. And then our council's executive committee met and provided feedback on the draft alternatives. The council took final action in September on this action. And today we're hoping that you do the same for the Monkfish aspects of the amendment. After your meeting, I'll be working to prepare the preliminary submission, which we will send over to Garfield for review. And our hope is that this would be implemented as soon as possible in 2026. Next slide. There are 5 different actions in the draft alternatives. 1, focused on specifications frequency. 2, specification setting process. 3, in-season adjustment authority. 4, on annual reviews and reports. And 5 is a section on listing framework adjustment items based on the first 4 draft alternatives. Next slide. It has preliminarily been determined that this action qualifies for categorical exclusion from further National Environmental Policy Act review because it is primarily administrative in nature. And so we're not planning to prepare an environmental assessment or an EIS. And this will, of course, save time and resources. Next slide. So the next section walks through the decision document that you have in your packet, which was prepared for the New England Council. These tables have now been updated in your presentation to reflect the New England Council's recommendations. And it also hinges on the actual draft document, the amendment document, some of the text included in that, and the council staff recommendations to the council when we're preparing those for the September council meeting. So the first section, if you go back 1 slide, thank you, is on specifications frequency. And if you look in our document, you'll see that each of our plans have a different approach to determining specifications frequency. Some say 2 years or 3 or nothing. So what the council would like to do is have a more consistent approach. And so it selected alternative 2, which allows the council to recommend specifications for 1 or up to 5 years across all the fishery management plans consistent with the best available science. This means that the council could select less than 5, but it gives the flexibility to have up to 5. Next slide. And so the reason why this is coming before you today is because it would result in regulation changes to the Monkfish Fishery Management Plan. It does allow for greater flexibility in planning stock assessments or data updates and subsequent management actions and a more consistent approach across the council's fishery management plans. It may also allow us to spread our specification actions throughout the year rather than having many final actions right now occur between the time of September and December. And council staff also recommends the same alternative. Next slide. So at the meeting, the council made this motion to select as preferred for action 1, specifications frequency, as alternative 2, specifications frequency. And their rationale was it allowed them the ability to consider specs up to 5 years, consistent with the best available science across all the fishery management plans, and it's responsive to the current state affairs with the fishery science. And this carried unanimously on a roll call vote. Next slide. Great. So the next section is on the specification setting process. 2 of our plans do not have a specified specification setting process defined. So they usually use a framework adjustment or amendment to set specifications. And what the council is looking to do under alternative 2 is to add a specifications setting process for the 2 fishery management plans that currently do not have one, and that includes the Northeast or groundfish multi-species fishery management plan and monkfish. So this would enable the council to set the specifications under a specifications process and not necessarily require the development of a framework adjustment. This section also adds the ability to adjust status determination criteria for the Northeast skate complex. Next slide. So in the actual document, there's a list of the items that would be included in a specifications process for Monkfish. And so this would involve a change to the Monkfish regulations, which is why it's coming in front of you today. And we hope that by adopting this, that it could streamline the work that we do and potentially require a more streamlined council and document process. So we, as staff, as well as the council, recommend this alternative as it increases management flexibility and consistency across all of our plans. Next slide. And the council motion on this was to select preferred as the specification setting process, which includes those new specification setting process for groundfish and monkfish. Next slide. Okay, now action 3 is on the in-season adjustment authority. Right now in our, for the New England Council, we have in-season adjustment authority for one of our fishery management plans, and that's Atlantic herring. And what the council decided to do is to have that authority extend to all of the other fishery management plans and allow for those adjustments to be to specifications and measures as identified in each specifications action under each fishery management plan. And this would be a consultation process that occurs by the fishery service with the council and to make adjustments within the year. I believe an example was provided yesterday under the mackerel discussion as well. Next slide. So we actually worked on this last year with the council. There was a consultation for in-season adjustment for herring. And the process took about 6 months from start to what published in the Federal Register, although it's not necessarily that it had to take that long. This is just how long it took last year. When we received the new stock assessment information, there was some analysis conducted by our plan team as well as ASMFC's technical committee, and we had some recommendations by our scientific and statistical committee. All of that work was important for the consultation that occurred with this with the regional office and the council at our September meeting. And we wrote a letter to the agency requesting an in-season adjustment, and the adjustment was published in the Federal Register by December, and it was available for the start of the January 1 fishing year this year. Next slide. You have a similar provision in your mackerel, squid, and butterfish regulations, which allows any specifications in that section, which is specifications and measures is pretty broad in the section. If you look at the CFR, and it's adjusted by the regional administrator in consultation with your council during the fishing year, and you publish it by notification in the Federal Register. Next slide. So what the council is hoping to do by adopting this in-season adjustment authority across all of its fishery management plans is to allow greater flexibility to respond to information in a more timely manner, including updated scientific and fishery information. The council opted for option B, which would allow for adjustments to specifications and measures consistent with each fishery management plan's specification setting process. And this does involve a regulation change for monkfish, which is why we're bringing it to you today. Next slide. And as I mentioned, the council did select as its approach alternative 2, option B, allowance for adjustments to specifications and measures identified under specifications actions by each fishery management plan. This allows for that increased flexibility in response to a more timely manner while still providing robust analysis as required under law. And this carried by unanimous consent. Next slide. Lastly, in the action section, we have the annual report or review. A few of our fishery management plans specifically state in regulation that the plan development teams will conduct an annual review or also prepare a report. And it says shall do this. So this is for monkfish, skates, and small mesh fishery management plans. What the council would like to do is remove the requirement to prepare those reports. And so that is what they're preferring. Next slide. It doesn't mean that the council would never prepare an annual report for these fishery management plans, but it allows for the council the flexibility about choosing the timing and the content of those for all of its fishery management plans. It doesn't prevent the council from prioritizing this within its annual priority setting process. And the council will continue to prepare appropriate analysis to comply with federal statutes in the development of actions for each of its fishery management plans. So this would involve a regulation change to monkfish, which is why this one is also coming to you today. Next slide. And the council, again, did recommend eliminating this requirement because it does result in duplicative reporting. And this carried by unanimous consent. Next slide. Lastly, this section is basically a catch-all. If the council were to adopt anything through actions 1 through 4, they could also list those as framework adjustment items. There may be something they want to adjust within a specific FMP that could be not slightly adjust through a future action, not through this omnibus. So therefore, we ask them if they want to list those as framework adjustment items in each of the fishery management plans. And so this would be a regulations change potentially for monkfish. Next slide. And the council did weigh in on this. We recommended that they add all actions 1 through 4 to list a framework adjustment item. Next slide. And the council did also, and they wanted to make sure that we update the list of frameworkable items based on the council's management decisions that were made at the meeting. So that also carried by unanimous consent. Next slide. And last, we had a motion to submit the action to No Fisheries and the council's rationale was to ensure that the requirements of the Magnuson and objectives of the council can be met more efficiently and in a manner reflective of the changing regional resources and capacity to support scientific updates and regulatory processes. This passed unanimously, and there was 1 abstention by Mr. Pentoning. Next slide. The combined effect we feel of the council's action is expanded tools to prevent fishery delays, improved planning of council final actions throughout the year, the ability to respond to new information in a timelier way, and an improved allocation of staff resources. Next slide. So we're hoping today that you will also take final action on the monkfish aspects of the omnibus amendment in order to create increase management flexibility and consistency. Next slide. And I do thank you for your time today. And if there are any questions, and then I think there is a draft motion prepared if you so choose. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jamie. Appreciate you walking us through that. So let's start with questions. Are there any questions from the council on the presentation? Not seeing any. I'd like to open it up to the public. Are there any questions from the public on the presentation? Not seeing any. Okay. Well, thank you, Jamie. A lot packed in here on this omnibus. So we do have a draft motion before us. Jason, anything else that you I don't know want to add to this, or is is it sufficient if the MID is having a mirror image of the New England's motion?
Yeah, I mean, from Mid-Atlantic Council staff's perspective, it results in some minor process streamlining and just to some degree makes it more comparable to standard Mid-Atlantic procedures.
Okay. Any other questions on this? I will look to the council if someone is willing to make this motion. I'm going to fully admit, good, it's someone I'm going to fully admit that I find it a bit of a tongue twister. So, Mr. Grist, I'm going to ask you to read the motion, and if you're willing to make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anything to help you out. I move that the council endorse the monkfish aspects of the New England Fishery Management Council's Omnibus Management Flexibility Amendment, selected as preferred alternatives by the New England Council, including submission of the actions to National Marine Fisheries Service.
Thank you very much. Do I have a second to the motion? Sunny Gwynn. Okay. Joe, would you like to speak to it?
I'll just speak to the fact, I think Jamie and also Jason have done a good job describing this to us. Obviously, has been hardly any comment questions to this one. So they, home run. I think that they've done it all.
Great, thank you. Sonny, anything to add? Thank you. Okay, any comments on this motion from the council? Not seeing any. This is for final action, so I'll look to the public. Are there any comments from the public on this motion? Okay, not seeing any. I will call the question. Is there any objection by the council to this motion? Any abstentions? One abstention from Garfo. Okay, with that, the motion passes unanimously. Jason or Jamie, anything else on this item? No. Okay. So let's see.
Thank you, Jamie.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today.
Very good. So with that, we're going to take a break for lunch. We will come back at 1 o'clock. As I mentioned a couple times already, we will pick up spiny dogfish after lunch. Thank you.